Hi everyone, my name is Mahatma and I'll be going through the Akamai API security demo. I want to focus on the main pillars of the solution. As you probably know, Akamai API security requires a copy of your API traffic. And to do so, we need to come to settings on the top to right, on our left, integrations. And we need to decide how we're going to have a copy of our APIs. Then we need to choose if we want to work with a specific public cloud, API gateway, and so on. Once we decide which connector we want to use that fits our environment, we will have something similar to what we can see now. For example, Azure Connector, where Akamai plugin gets a copy of all Azure API management on the Azure side. So as you can see here, we are collecting everything with this specific tag, added connection rules. This is one option. We could even choose something else like let's monitor a specific solution like API management, Azure Kubernetes, or simply connect all to all resources. Once we figure out how to collect such traffic, keep in mind the following. We are an out-of-band solution, so we want to be in line, we won't impact the traffic, and thus you can focus on this collection, and once we have it, we will populate this tab called inventory, and once we go there, we will be able to see all the metadata the solution has processed until now. So for example, from a specific API where we have information regarding phone number, vehicle identification, maybe even SSN, so the ID identification, we will be able to see which APIs are holding such information. So in this example, we can see 3 APIs with SSN on their response. And we can also find the same for password. We have 3 APIs with password on the response, and also 19 APIs on the request side. And once we have it, we will be able to see which kind of API type we are dealing with, the tags, in other words, a group of each data type that we have, the list of URLs or hosts, and finally, the amount of APIs. This is the dashboard, the main dashboard. Now, if we come to APIs and finally going over the list of each API that we have found until now, we will be seeing the following. Hosts, I can group them by hosts. I can group them by method. I can even group them by host, method, and do a filter. For example, this is very powerful. I can filter by host and look for anything with demo in their name. And now I will see APIs in this kind of view. I want you to focus on the powerful granularity that we can provision in your environment by using the options here is for filters, where you can filter anything that you want. We have filters options like host, authentication. We can look for a specific type of authentication if necessary, if it is accessible from the internet or not, by tags and so on. There are so many options. And we can also add a column as needed. For example, I'm going to add the column last seen, and then I want you to have the following idea about this table. This is the same experience that you would have if you use Microsoft Excel table. You can just manage the way you want. So what I have just done, I just chose to set up a new column, let's see. I'm now filtering by the latest API updates, as you can see. Some APIs are still in learning mode. Let's choose one. Can we pick this one? And as you can see, we are waiting for more consumers to happen. In this environment, this demo environment, we have said that we need at least 10 different consumers. Consumers, aka specific token or email, IPs, if tokens are not being used in such environment. And in this environment, 0 days. But in prod environment, we require at least 7 days to have this set to done. Once we have this information, we will build the open API spec of this API. We will be able to generate charts about how much it's being used. And of course, if we have any kind of incident, we will be showing here as well. If we look for something that has been already learned, for example, this one has been marked as done, let's look for something with the wording demo. As you can see here, the host is something else. So I can simply come here to search APIs demo and finally check those options here. Remember, I can always choose to look for the same information using the host perspective as the main option. As you can see here, the latest one with the wording demo is from September. And with sensitive data would be those here. So I'm gonna click on it. Since this is done, I can also check samples of this data. This is very helpful because even though the solution only works with metadata, as we usually set for each environment, we at least hold to one sample at maximum 5 API calls for this API. If necessary, if the customer believes that this is not relevant, we can set this to avoid such collection and just hash obfuscate such data. And as you can see here, this information is authenticated by the user test at testing.com. And we can see that the server is responding with such information as required. So this is visibility, and this is very powerful. Once we understand this and the impact that we can have in the organization with such information, such visibility, we can simply come over here and choose the best filter for our scenario. So right now, I'm going to focus on authentication. Authentication. I'm going to search for it. Remember, filters, authentication. Let's search only for not enforced and not detected. And now, from our list of almost 200 APIs, we can see that 85 of them don't have any sort of authentication. And we can even check it in more details by going over one of them, get user details, for example, check the samples, and see that it's just doing API calls, very simple API calls without any sort of authentication. To avoid check information without any relevant data type, we can simply do another filter like data type response. Let's look for something like email. And there you go. Now we have this example message, or then just go over samples and you will be able to see success samples of it with the following information regarding what you were looking for. Great. Now to continue with the inventory and visibility section, let's go over changes. Over changes, you can find any single change as the name suggests, and we can look for new header. New header. Let's check this change on the community posts recent, and then just review the OpenAPI spec of it. And now we know that at 12:45 on this day of 2024, we had this change. So the baseline of this API has changed. And finally, over data types. Now, we started with statistics, then we moved to APIs. Finally, we understood how the system correlates and understands the baseline of each changes over the changes tab. And finally, at data types. At data types, we will be able to check every single data type, and you can configure them as not sensitive, as sensitive, and even forbidden when you don't want it to see any specific information like credit card associated in your environment. So let's check on credit card, for example. One click, let me remove this filter, and there you go. Now we have one credit card. Let's click here. We can see email, credit card as part of the data available here. Now, if we want to add something else, like a specific and custom data type, just click on data types and then manage, or just go to settings and the first over the top right, and you will see the first screen will be regarding data types. Over data types, you can create your own. And the best way to understand how this works, let's find the one for credit card, add it. As you can see, filter by name. Someone has added the name credit card. This one actually comes out of the box once you deploy the solution in your environment. So we have the name. We add an icon just as a matter of a reference. Finally, tags that you can use later instead of using specific data type. Then go over the field name. Remember, this is a dictionary. So on the left, the name credit card or whatever makes sense to associate with credit card. And you can even create an association like and or maybe an or, where you want to double to check the credit card wording with the standard value for credit cards. Of course, you can simply change this to or and create something similar to your environment. In this case, it is configured as obfuscate, so we always gonna hash this information. And in this scenario, we are avoiding this data if it comes over the headers, but you can simply uncheck or check this box. So if you want to create your own, just go over create a data type and you should be good. Now that we have a good baseline about our APIs, let's move on to security. Security, once again, to the main tab. This table correlates each incident, each finding, each alert from Akamai API security on the perspective of OWASP API top 10. So as you can see here, we have a few tickets, 16 in total, associated with OWASP API top 3, about 17 with API 8. Findings here, it is regarding anything associated with posture. In other words, best practices. So we should not share sensitive data without authentication. If we do, if the solution finds such a thing, we're gonna have an alert for it. On the other hand, we have runtime, the flamingo of the solution, where we're gonna detect deviations from the norm or some APIs. So if you have a situation where one API call only gets one sensitive data for each specific user, one day, if one API call is trying to retrieve 1,000 sensitive data from 1,000 different users, this is a deviation from the norm. The baseline is just one sensitive data for one user. Let's go on and move to the alert itself. So over findings, we have many lines here. Each one of them is one ticket that's gonna be shared with the SOC team over CM or any other integration. What I'm trying to do is to group them by severity and finally by type. And now I can check any high incident. So I have one ticket here associated with a bad certificate, 16 tickets associated with the type of the server exposed as part of the API call. So let's check this one from demo utilities. The system always informs you about what has happened, why this is a problem, and what you should do. So in this case, it's saying that you are sharing the web server name and its version. So we can click on evidence, and you will see server listed here. This is not good, and depending on what the customer may have, it will impact easily because you are simply sharing sensitive data with a potential attacker. So they're gonna just quote unquote Google it and try to find a vulnerability for it. And let's move to runtime, the flamingo. So over runtime, we have the same information divided in two parts. Incidents, where you have the perspective from the SOC based on alerts, and attackers, where you have the perspective from someone that would oversee SOC, where they will see the attackers, the source of each incident, each alert. So first, incidents. We always start showing those from the latest 30 days. Since this is deviation from the norm, it's important to focus on what is happening right now. So let's filter by the last year, where we have more data. It's here. And with this, I'm gonna do the same. I'm gonna organize by severity type. Let me change the grouping to high to low. So now we have many incidents here. And let's look for those associated with Ebola. So I want you to go over this one, the scrapping attack. Let me show you. I just click on this link. The solution is saying the user, the source, has sent 100 request calls. Always change the UID here as part of the path. And let's check evidence. As part of the evidence, we have always the same IP. The attacker is always changing the UID. In this case, every time they are doing such a thing, we can see from line 11 to 15 on the response side of this API call, different sensitive data from different users. So I'm now checking on Thomas, I'm now checking on Courtney, and so on, many others. Now, if we pay attention on the request side, we will observe that on line 18, it's always the same source, test@test.com. So this is due to the fact that we decode the job token, and then we are capable to show that the source is always the same. So in this scenario, since this is a deviation from the norm, we needed to block this token. And we need to revoke this token, block this source anyways. And we can do that with this button, Block Attacker, where we have integrations with other tools like API gateways, like WAFs. If you are an Akamai customer, you will be able to do so directly with your Akamai WAF. And then you can decide if you want to block forever or just for a specific amount of hours. And once you do so, I want to block it for 5 minutes. And there you go. So if they try to do it once again, we're going to block. And then if for some reason this is a false positive because this is an exception in the environment, then just make sure to click here and move it to false positive. Once you do that, you're going to teach the machine learning to avoid marking such behavior from the source as an incident. You can also automate the blocking process by going over runtime, clicking on attackers. And from here, we can see on the left the sources, the IPs, in some cases, the header. So they are all here. At the same time, you can see on the right side, each attack or each ticket, if you will, right? And I'm going to look for a few tickets, and I may decide to block it directly from here if necessary. But if we are looking for automation, we want to do this in this manner. We're just going to pay attention to a few factors here. Over the left side, or even on the previous page, we can see a percentage. The percentage here is regarding the confidence the machine learning has for each specific attack. So you can use this as a parameter to create a workflow. So let's talk about workflow. Workflow would be the automation that you will configure to block automatically any sort of attack that makes sense for your environment. So let's start with confidence, where the confidence would be greater than 70, for example. So then the solution lists each attack in the same situation, and we can move to add things from a specific location or a specific country in this case, or a specific risk score. So let's work with risk score. We want to block anything that would be critical, high, and medium. In such a situation, the solution is just showing you what would be doing if the same thing happens. In other words, if the confidence is greater than 70 and if the risk score would be medium, high, or critical. So just click next. You just provide a name, integration, and you should be good. Just define how you want to do so, okay? And then save. You can, depending on your situation, you may decide to block by headers, block by token, or maybe just IPs, okay? That's it. And now let's focus on active testing. We just did the entire journey for the production environment or even the pre-prod, where we have the integration for API gateway or WAF, maybe deploying a sensor, a quote-unquote agent on the server, either Kubernetes, EC2, whatever. As you may remember, we checked on the inventory. We had an inventory baseline and so on. Then we moved to security, where we checked the alerts based on findings, and so posture, and finally runtime based on machine learning deviation from the norm. Now, it would be very beneficial if we simply detect this kind of stuff on the pre-prod environment. We can do that with testing, active testing. So let's click on it, testing. Testing, quote unquote, would be the same thing as a DAST, but DAST for APIs. So if you are familiar with solutions like Veracode checkmarks, what we're going to talk about right now would be the same thing, but different from those vendors, we only focus on API security, and they don't. So in this screen, in the single pane of glass, you can add your application. Your application would be your API server details. What would be that? The documentation, the Swagger file, the host name, the authentication that you're gonna need to use such a thing. So let me show you. So one single app called Active Pharmacy Lab, REST. We won't show the configuration process. So settings, environment. I just chose one application, so I just clicked on settings, environment, and now I can see the base URL that we need to use. In this case, we are using in a private environment for CI/CD purpose, but it could be something over the internet if necessary. We have the documentation over here, added, would be the Swagger file. Okay, once again, local as part of the CI/CD process, but it's not mandatory to be CI/CD. Authentications relevant for this. Why do we need authentication? First, probably your APIs would require authentication. And second, you may have different personas to test. So you want to make sure that user one is not capable to access data from user admin, all right? So once you have all this data, you can save and then go to scans. And once you're here, just make sure to run any scan over this button on the top right. And finally, let's read a completed scan. So each line here, it is a ticket that you can share with Jira or other solutions to your developers. And let's check this simple example here, sensitive data in URL as part of an insecure design. So this is basically a pen test for APIs. The solution is telling you what happened and how you should remediate that. And it's saying that it's sharing a client secret as part of the process over the URL. So this is not good. Let's check the process, post user register. And this is what is coming from the Akamai API security active testing solution. So now you can see what we sent to the server, the response that we got from it. And finally, a second API call where we tested the user ID associated with and the client secret, and we got a response. So this is not good. Someone could simply read this if someone is sniffing the traffic somehow. Once we have all these findings, all this data configured properly, we can simply go over CI/CD and configure what would be the best fit for our environment. So for each button here, we're gonna provide details about how to configure the CI/CD and Akamai active testing, and then you can create security gates on your environment and make sure an API won't move to production if we find high or critical alerts or whatever makes sense to you. All right, that's it. I appreciate your time. We have just reviewed all the features. Appreciate your time. Thank you.